Today's video is about one of the most tragic missing persons cases in Germany. Felix Heger, who was almost 3 years old at the time, disappeared in 2006 after a weekend with his father. The father's body was found sometime later, but there is still no trace of Felix. His grandparents are convinced that the child is still alive and that there is more to Felix's disappearance than the public prosecutor's office assumes. For almost 20 years, they have been desperately fighting a race against time to see their grandson again before they die. Felix was born on April 8, 2003, near Heidelberg. At first glance, his mother Manuela and father Michael seem like a happy little family. Felix's grandparents Johann and Maria Schmitz are also incredibly happy. They had almost given up hope of having a grandchild and are overjoyed when Felix is born. In November of the same year, however, Manuela separated from her husband Michael. The two had been a couple for 13 years. They had been having problems in their relationship for some time, but had never made them public. Michael had wanted to become a teacher, but had abandoned those plans at some point. Instead, he worked only sporadically, spent a lot of time at home, sat on the balcony and played the guitar. He had also been mentally unstable for some time. In 2000, he often threatened to take his own life. After a failed attempt, Michael was admitted to inpatient treatment, but broke it off after only 3 days. Manuela was bothered by the fact that he did not want to take responsibility and could not get his life under control. As a result, they separated in November 2003. In June 2005, the marriage was legally dissolved. From then on, Felix lived with his mother in Oftersheim, a town near Heidelberg. Michael Heger moved out and lives in a one-room apartment. Felix, now 2 years old, visits his grandparents almost every day. He has a particularly close relationship with his grandfather Johann. The two are inseparable. His grandparents are almost like his own parents to Felix. He loves being with them. And the cheerful 2-year-old also brings a lot of happiness and joie de vivre into the lives of Johann and Maria. Michael Heger had been able to obtain visitation rights in court. He regularly takes Felix to his place for the weekend, goes for walks with him, or visits the playground. This was also the case on January 6, 2006. It is Epiphany, and Michael arrives at Manuela's house on time to pick up his son. But Felix doesn't want to go. The 2.5-year-old starts crying and fights back with his hands and feet. He absolutely does not want to go with his father. Manuela is surprised. Her son has never behaved like this before. Felix insists on calling his grandfather. And that's what they do. The phone rings a few times and his grandfather answers. Felix immediately starts crying again and repeatedly asks his grandfather to come and pick him up. Johann tries to calm his grandson down over the phone, but that doesn't work either. The 2-year-old hides in the apartment. Eventually, Felix's mother manages to convince him. He goes with his father, looking a little sad. It would be the last time Manuela said goodbye to her son, and the last time she would see him. Felix's grandfather, Johann, has never forgiven himself for not picking up his grandson and helping him. His guilty conscience eats away at him. When Michael fails to return Felix on January 8th as agreed, Manuela first tries to reach him by phone. When that doesn't work and she can't find him at his apartment, she alerts the police. Michael did not reliably adhere to his visitation rights and often arrived late or not at all to pick up Felix. However, He had always brought him back on time. For this reason, and because there was no trace of Michael or Felix, the police began their investigation on January 9, 2006. Friends of Manuela and Michael quickly came forward. They said they had met Felix and his father on January 6th at a barbecue hut in the Oftersheim forest, and had even talked to him briefly. At first glance, there is nothing unusual about this. Michael often went for walks with Felix, and the nearby forest was a popular destination for the two of them. However, the friends described Felix's behavior as strange. The boy had been shy around them. It may be normal for children of such a young age to stare fearfully at strangers or be stiff, but they had never seen this before, and it did not fit with Felix's usual behavior. The police searched the Oftersheim forest but found nothing. They then opened Michael's apartment. On the bed, they find two conspicuously placed books describing methods of ending one's own life. The investigators are alarmed, especially given Michael's history. One day later, on January 10, 2006, they find Michael's car in Bühlerstall. The town is 100 kilometers from Felix's home and is located directly on the northern Black Forest. The car is parked right at the edge of the forest. There is some blood in the car itself. This can later be traced back to Michael. On January 11th, the police search the area with hundreds of officers and several helicopters. A trail of blood drops leads away from Michael's car and into the forest. The investigators follow the trail but have to abandon the search after a while because it is getting too dark. On January 13th, they find a hiding place in the forest about 400 meters away from Michael's car. There is a sparse camp at a crevice in the rocks. Around the camp, they find footprints in the snow. The police examine the hideout more closely and find a sleeping bag, a men's jacket belonging to Michael, several empty liquor bottles, a pack of sleeping pills, Michael's ID card, his glasses, and a glove belonging to Felix. In the inside pocket of the jacket is a copy of Michael's driver's license. On the back is a farewell letter addressed to Manuela. Michael begins the letter with "Dear Manuela" and tells her that he always tried to live up to her expectations, but his best was never good enough. He ends the letter with the sentence, "And shit, I love Felix way too much." However, he does not write that he wants to take his own life. For Felix's grandparents, this wording is a ray of hope. Michael writes in the present tense that he loves Felix. They are certain that Felix is still alive because Michael attached great importance to correct grammar and was meticulous about tense usage. If Felix had already been dead when Michael wrote the letter, he would have used the past tense. They are certain of this. The letter is presented to a psychologist. He says that it is not clearly a suicide note. Michael does not mention anywhere that he wants to harm himself or Felix. However, the last sentence also presents him with a puzzle. Michael loves his son too much. Too much for what? While the police are still racking their brains over this, a witness comes forward to the investigators. On the morning of January 13th, she was driving about 30 kilometers from the Black Forest across the French border. In the middle of nowhere, she saw a man with a little boy. Perhaps he was waiting for a vehicle to take him and his son away, because according to the witness, there was no car nearby. Two other witnesses made the same observation. The search was then extended to France, but without success. The search in the Black Forest also had to be paused on January 14th due to heavy snowfall. Another witness came forward. She claimed to have seen Michael and Felix on January 11th in a nearby supermarket. She noticed that despite his well-groomed appearance, the man had very dirty hands. Nevertheless, the investigation stagnates. The next clue comes almost 7 weeks later, on February 26th, 2006. A couple is walking about 300 meters from the parking lot where Michael's car was found. Between the trees, they discover a corpse. The body has already been gnawed on by wild animals, especially the face. Nevertheless, it is relatively quick to determine that the dead man is undoubtedly Michael Heger. The area is searched extensively for Felix. Blood and cadaver dogs are also used. They find nothing that points to Felix. The ground and rivers in the area had been frozen solid for weeks. Michael could therefore neither have buried Felix's body nor thrown it into the water. Michael Heger's body is examined more closely at the forensic medicine department in Freiburg. The doctors quickly conclude that Michael murdered himself. The body shows several chest injuries. It is assumed that Michael fell under the influence of medication or alcohol and ultimately died from the cold and his injuries. Other investigators later notice a few inconsistencies in this theory. On March 2, 2006, the police announced that they assume Michael Heger first murdered Felix and then himself. Michael had never gotten over his separation from his wife and wanted to punish Manuela by taking away what she loved most, her own child. When the ground thawed in early April, investigators searched the area again with sniffer dogs. It is possible that Michael had been planning his crime for a long time. Witnesses also reported that Michael's car had been parked at the site several times in the weeks before Felix's disappearance. He may have dug a grave for his son before the ground froze. But once again, the search is unsuccessful. The police are now searching less and less for Felix. They assume that the boy can no longer be found alive. Three months after Felix's disappearance, Johann and Maria Schmitz traveled to the Black Forest themselves. They are certain that their grandson is still alive and want to see the area for themselves. When they see the place where Michael's hideout was, they are sure that Felix was never there. That's what their gut feeling tells them. But there are also clues to support this. The only trace suggesting that Felix was ever in the Black Forest is his glove, which was found in the hideout. The strange thing is that the second glove has been at his grandparents' house for months. They thought that the other glove, which had now been found in the Black Forest, had been lost at some point. Why would Michael have put a single glove on his son? And why would he have taken a single glove with him in the first place? Was it deliberately placed there to throw investigators off the trail? The blood that led from Michael's car to the hiding place in the forest also suggests that someone else had placed it there to lure investigators onto this trail. The grandparents think it's possible that Michael gave Felix to an unknown person abroad. The police, however, consider this extremely unlikely. At the latest, when he was registered for school, it would have been noticed that there were no papers or documents for the child. Johann and Maria are not satisfied with the police investigation and hire a private detective. Detective Julius Engel has already been able to return several missing children to their families. Felix's grandparents have high hopes for him. Julius Engel believes that Michael handed his son over to a third, as yet unknown person, and that Felix is still alive. He also doubts the alleged cause of Michael's death. The detective learns that Michael was involved in sex and esoteric circles for a time. For example, in 1997, he spent a few weeks in Portugal with the Tamara sect. After that, his whole personality changed. He was also apparently involved in a sect in the Black Forest, known as the Wasserman Center. Today, this sect is called Net of Light. However, there are many groups there, and it was not known which one Michael was in contact with. What is clear, however, is that Michael knew his way around the Black Forest very well as a result. He also regularly attended esoteric fairs. While researching at one such fair, Julius Engel is approached by a woman. She tells him that she knows Felix is living with the Tamara sect in Portugal. Julius Engel then travels to Portugal to look for Felix. The police find out about this. They visit the Tamara sect, but without success. There is still no trace of Felix. The police also question the private detective and find his behavior highly unprofessional. In the past, he had already provided the police with several leads that only cost the investigators time and led nowhere. This time, too, the detective had no contact details for the woman who allegedly approached him. He had not asked for her name or her phone number. The police suspect that Julius Engel is making up leads in order to stay in business. The grandparents then end their cooperation with Julius Engel. However, by this point, they have already paid him their entire savings, around 70,000 euros. When lawyer Alexander Moser learns of Felix's disappearance, he agrees to take on the case free of charge. He too is convinced that Michael Heger did not murder himself. He also considers it unlikely that he murdered Felix. Heger was sometimes unreliable, but neighbors and friends always described him as a loving father who only wanted the best for his child. The lawyer believes that the books found in Michael's apartment were deliberately placed there to throw investigators off the trail. The aim was to make the world believe that Michael Heger was a father who took his son with him to his death. The lawyer's theory? Murder. Alexander Moser is particularly struck by the autopsy report. No traces of alcohol could be found in either his blood or urine. And the chest injuries alone would not have been enough to kill Michael. No clear cause of death was given at all. Why would Michael, who knew the Black Forest so well, suddenly fall and die? In addition, animals had already gnawed on the body, and Michael had obviously been dead for several days. Why hadn't search parties or helicopters discovered the body earlier? There were hardly any trees directly above the lifeless body, so it could have been seen from above. On top of that, it had rained and snowed in the days before Michael's remains were found. However, the body was barely covered by leaves, pine needles, or snow, as if it had only been there for a very short time. Furthermore, the police had so far ignored the fact that Michael's glasses were found in the hiding place in the forest. Without these glasses, Michael was almost blind. He would not have been able to walk several hundred meters along a rocky hiking trail before falling. Felix's family says that Michael Heger would not have been able to walk more than 5 meters without his glasses. Another major oversight is a puncture wound on Michael's wrist, which was noticed during the autopsy. He could have been easily sedated or poisoned through this spot. However, the forensic medicine department did not order any toxicological tests to verify this. The lawyer is therefore requesting a retrospective toxicological examination. However, the public prosecutor's office has rejected this request on the grounds that it cannot pursue every wild idea. They remain convinced that Michael Heger took sleeping pills and, under their influence, fell on the way and died as a result of the fall. Nevertheless, they were unable to name a clear cause of death. They are certain, however, that Felix is no longer alive and that he was killed by his father. But how likely is it that someone who wants to end his own life would stumble on the way there and die from the fall? Without his glasses, without which he cannot see more than 5 meters ahead. Lawyer Alexander Moser seeks help from a lung specialist. Together, they come up with a theory that is not as unrealistic as it sounds at first. They assume that at least one other person was involved. One clue that the police did not attach much importance to was the trail left by a search dog on January 11, 2006. When the police first searched the forest area extensively, one of the dogs picked up Michael Heger's scent. The police followed the dog through the forest for 5 kilometers. They arrived at a former inn. The dog alerted them at the back door and then led the investigators up to the attic. There was a small, sparsely furnished apartment there. Michael may have stayed there with Felix alone or with a third person in the meantime. In some online forums, there is a theory that the Black Forest sect also often stayed at this inn. Michael may have planned to hand Felix over to this sect, or to join the sect together with Felix. Some online posts go on to describe that a few groups within the sect are also involved in human trafficking and only present the image of a sect to the outside world. Perhaps Michael had also fallen into the clutches of such a sect. Could the sentence in his letter, "And shit, I love Felix too much," refer to the fact that he loved Felix too much to hand him over to this sect? Had he perhaps changed his mind and wanted to abandon his plans? But the sect members got in his way. Did they want to prevent Michael from telling anyone what he knew? Then a man who had already struggled with thoughts of murdering himself in the past would be an all too easy victim to get to a child. However, I must emphasize that these are only assumptions and speculations, and that there is no further evidence for this theory. Nor are these assumptions part of Alexander Moser's theory. However, the lawyer and the lung specialist also believe that Michael Heger was murdered. They suspect that Michael was poisoned via the puncture wound on his wrist, and that his body was simply placed where it was found. The murderers may have pushed him down a slope to make it look like an accident. It is also striking that the body was found right next to a large road that can be easily accessed by car. It is therefore possible that a car drove by, threw the body out of the car, and drove on. The police continue to consider this theory unlikely and are not pursuing it further. Felix has now been missing for almost 20 years. The police have given up the search. For them, it is clear that Michael Heger first killed his son and then himself. But Felix's family is not giving up. Manuela, Felix's mother, is still severely traumatized. Since Felix's disappearance, she has not appeared in public because it is too difficult for her to talk about her son and what may have happened to him. But Johann and Maria, Felix's grandparents, continue to fight tirelessly. They are certain that Felix is still alive. They believe that Michael handed his son over to an unknown person. Giving up and no longer searching for their grandson is not an option for them. In an interview almost 5 years after Felix's disappearance, they say that his playroom still looks the same as it did back then. They haven't changed a thing. Johann always has some chocolate on hand in case his beloved grandson does come home. But time is running out for the two of them. They are now 87 and 89 years old, and their greatest wish is to be able to hold Felix in their arms once more before they die. At the beginning of this year, in an emotional interview, they appealed once again for anyone with information about Felix's disappearance to please contact them. If Felix grew up in another family, they do not want to tear him away from that family. They just want to know that their grandchild is doing well so that they can finally find peace. Together with an aid organization, the couple created the website felix-info.net. On this site, you can find all the information about Felix's disappearance and numerous pictures. I was allowed to use a few of them in today's video. The website also features a picture of Felix showing what he might look like today at the age of 18 to 25. Feel free to visit the site if you want to learn more about Felix's disappearance. And that brings us to the end of today's video. For me, the disappearance of Felix Heger is one of the most tragic missing persons cases I have shown here. I sincerely hope that his grandparents will find out what happened to their grandson and where Felix is before they die. Their dedication is truly incredible and deserves great respect. Perhaps today's video will help us remind people of Felix Heger's disappearance and encourage them to keep their eyes open. Feel free to write your theories or opinions on today's case in the comments. And if you liked the video, please leave a like, comment, and/or subscribe. This really helps the channel enormously. Thank you in advance, and thank you for watching. Good night, and see you next time.